Welcome back, and thanks for tuning in to the Season 1 finale of Coaching in Higher Education. As always, I'm your host, Tim Jansa, a certified leadership and organizational development coach and higher ed professional of almost 20 years. Today's program is dedicated to a topic that has come up repeatedly in several episodes, but one we have yet to explore fully, and that is faculty transitioning into leadership positions. With all the necessary shifts in mindset and perspective, this critical step in many faculty leaders' careers entails. To help us better understand how coaches can assist their clients in tackling these types of transitions, I'm honored to be joined today by Dr. Dorine Lawrence Hughes, a dear coaching colleague and principal consultant and coach at Brazen Communication. So let's see what insights Dorine can share with us about the specific challenges of burgeoning faculty leaders. Welcome to the podcast, Dorine, and thank you so much for taking the time to share your expertise with us.
Thanks for the invitation, Tim. Happy to be here.
So as I mentioned in my intro, faculty to leader transitions is a topic that's cropped up quite frequently in previous conversations with my guests on the show. And This is, I think, why it's such a perfect topic to end this first season of the podcast with. And to be honest, I really couldn't be happier than to have you as my guest for this. So thank you again for being here. So Dorine, for somebody who might be a little bit unfamiliar with these specific types of transitions, what would you say are the main reasons we need to talk about them, especially in the coaching context?
Sure. I think it's really important that we remember that faculty to leader transitions are really nothing new. Historically, right, leadership in mostly all of our colleges and universities, even to the highest levels, those roles have been held by folks who were either former faculty members or current faculty members. And so this notion of transitioning to leadership is not a new concept. I think the reason it's becoming more present in our conversations is because we are starting to think of leadership in new and different ways. In my circles, leadership is certainly both a skill and a discipline. And we're realizing that many faculty leaders are in those roles, but they're feeling woefully underprepared for what those roles call for. And so there's more of an openness and an admission to talking about the fact that this is actually pretty pervasive. Someone gets a leadership role and is underprepared. I'm not going to say they're not prepared, but they're woefully underprepared for what it takes to lead successfully.
You mentioned leadership as a skill and a discipline. What do you mean by that?
You know, when you look at any sort of leadership development program, typically there is a set of skills that anyone can acquire that would be a sign of effective leadership. Good communication skills, that can be taught. Conflict management skills, that can be taught. So there are things that you can learn to be a leader, and some of these things are institution specific. So you need to know something about the operations about your institution. You need to know how human resources works. You need to know the faculty contract. In some instances, you need to know the union contract. There's knowledge that one can acquire to be a leader, but I also think it's a discipline because there is a certain mindset and approach that one needs to cultivate and develop in order to really become a leader that will serve their team, their unit, their institution in a way that's uniquely theirs. We're not all of the same. And so that's a discipline, trying to figure out what kind of leader you want to be and then maintain that through the tenure of your leadership. And that can be quite tough.
Yeah, the question of what leader you want to be, I think these are things that many faculty members never really think about traditionally in their career, right? They don't have to.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And, when you talked about the knowledge and the skills that it takes, I mean, to me, that just screams one of those typical HR run one-off development opportunities, right? Where you have a half day, a workshop, whatever, and then it's like, go be great leaders now.
Off to the races. Exactly.
Now, you said something that I wanted to also ask you about. You said there's a transition from being a faculty member as a contributor to what the department does to a manager and a leader. And I hadn't really thought about that transition, even though I've often talked about the difference between management and leadership. What's your take on that multi-step progression to get to management first and then to actual leadership?
Sure. And I don't think it's any different in higher education than it is in corporate or government. And so I typically say that the difference between a contributor, a manager, and a leader in any circumstance, a contributor is generally your frontline worker, a person who is sort of doing the heavy lifting. You're doing the work because it needs to be done and it's valuable and it's important, but you don't necessarily need to have any sort of broad systems knowledge. You are just making sure that you're doing your part in really effective ways. So for faculty, it's common to refer to faculty as sort of independent contractors, right? You know that you need to hold office hours. You know you need to teach. You know you need to do research. You also need to do service, right? You do your part. And if you do your part, and if everyone does their part, then the department seems to run along, right? Undergird that with a certain level of respect and civility. So that's being a contributor. I think a manager is one who, first of all, has the responsibility to make sure that the wheels are on the wagon and things keep running. And so this is a person who has an awareness of systems, policies, processes, and procedures. And so folks that transition into the chair role often are now finding that they have to engage in a certain level of management, and not just people management, but just understanding how the schedule works, understanding how hiring works, understanding the ebb and flow of the academic year so that things move along, so that people get reviewed properly. The student evaluations, all of those sort of technical pieces, those are the pieces that I think good managers should develop an awareness of. When you get those things wrong, they lead to other problems. So management is certainly important. Now, I feel like that's different from leadership, in where one is called to maybe have a vision of the future, a sense of direction. What kind of department do we want to be? How do we want to treat each other? Who are we as a department within the larger sort of orbit of the university? So that's different from someone just knowing policies, processes, and procedures. That's a person who may have a vision for the future that may be different from the current vision.
And then, of course, communicating that vision and getting the buy-in from everybody. I think that's the litmus test. But it seems like so many new faculty leaders, especially you mentioned chairpersons, right? Chairs, It seems like in their training or onboarding, it often stops at the managerial level, but it never really gets to the leadership level. You mentioned earlier this issue of systems thinking and then of mindset shift. And I'm wondering, when I hear this, when I'm thinking about this, especially in the academic context, the question of identity just screams out to be addressed. Because, as a faculty, your identity is so rooted in your discipline and your achievements as a scholar, as a researcher, maybe as an instructor as well. But then all of a sudden, that shifts. So what's your take and what's your experience on that?
Yeah, I think my experience on that, both personally and as a coach, is it takes time to shift that mindset. Some folks, it's a little bit of a smoother pathway because they are learning that they won't be as successful in their role if they still have that contributor mindset. But it's tough, especially in higher education, I think, and this is where higher ed is a little bit unique in this regard. It's porous, right? So leadership, you can be the chair of a department for 3 years and then go back to faculty, right? If this is something that you want to do. Those are your peers. Those are folks that you work with. Those are folks that you're in the faculty meetings with. And so to suddenly become the leader of that group, it requires you to think differently. I won't go so far as to say your allegiances need to change, but they need to be different. And you need to be mindful of that. Because if you aren't mindful of that, you can be on the back foot and be somewhat surprised that your peers are now treating you differently because you have, so to speak, gone over to the dark side.
Yeah, the dark side. It's funny, right? As soon as somebody is being perceived as administration, that seems to be, that's the A word in academia a lot of times.
Yeah, you've sold your soul.
We just don't know who just yet to whom, right? There's an article that I cited in my own research, and it's by Iris Birdrow. The article is titled "Kings Among Kings." It's about chair people. And you talk about different allegiances, or maybe not different, but just a twist or a shift in how you weigh your allegiances and how all of a sudden you emerge from a group of peers to be a little above them, but not. Could you
not quite, right?
A little bit, like what are the dynamics at play here?
Yeah, I mean, you can imagine how tough that is, right? And it's not just chairs; it's any faculty member who's now in a position to make decisions about others in the department, and that includes staff too, right? And it can be awkward to suddenly hold people accountable in ways that you didn't have to do in the past. Just take the simple thing of asking people what their teaching load is and realizing that someone is not meeting their teaching load requirements, and then asking someone that they need to teach an additional course. As faculty, you're kind of minding your own business. It's not your thing. You don't have to. But now as chair or maybe assistant dean or associate dean, you are realizing that some folks need to be held to account. They need to be teaching more, and you're telling them to do that. And that can feel quite awkward. And new faculty members are prepared for the level of resistance that they may feel when they are suddenly asked to be in charge.
You mentioned staff.
Sure.
And that's a dynamic that I've observed many times as both a faculty, adjunct faculty, I have to say, but then also as a staff member, is where faculty sometimes, let's say, have a little bit of warped opinion of staff, but it goes the other way as well, right? Where
it does.
Faculty, they have terminal degrees a lot of times. There's a research agenda. They might have national, international prominence in their field. And then you have the staff member who might just, have a very basic degree, but still gets a lot of work done. And I think there's an appreciation that is often lacking. But again, it goes both ways. So what have you observed from the perspective of shifting the mindset of suddenly having to lead those staff members and maybe appreciate them differently? And how have you as a coach helped your faculty leader clients with this?
I mean, that's sort of a loaded question, right? It depends on the institution. It depends on the environment.
Yeah.
I think just broadly speaking, and I'm certainly generalizing here, it depends on the role. So for instance, faculty members who then become assistant or associate deans with staff, and that's actually not that common. A lot of folks hold these roles and there's no support staff, or you have to rely on collaboration to get your work done because there's no sort of direct reporting to you. But in the instances where there is this notion of managing a person or people, we weren't trained to do that when we were faculty. That's just not taught. There's nothing in the curriculum about being a faculty member or being a grad student that prepares you to understand what it takes to maybe have developmental conversations with staff, understand the role of staff. A lesson that I learned a long time ago, as I like to say, as a baby lawyer, as a junior lawyer, when I was working with paralegals and legal staff, is they were here before we got there, and they're going to be there long after we leave. And so there's a certain amount of respect and a level of appreciation you should have for staff, because there's a good chance they're going to be around. They know things you don't know. They have institutional awareness and knowledge you don't have. And oftentimes their education levels run the gamut. It may be that their education level is not a PhD, but they are specializing in other things. So I had a lot of staff members who really love to do a lot of continuing education in management and project management. And those are things that I needed to rely on them for, because that just was not my strength. And so I think it can be tricky for new faculty leaders to understand that folks are bringing strengths that can be leveraged for the success of everyone. And that takes time.
Bringing your strengths, I think this is where we as coaches can be extremely helpful.
Yeah, I think so. I agree.
Because when you ask a regular faculty member what their strengths are, I think they're going to look at disciplinary strengths, knowledge, connectedness with other researchers in their field, maybe their teaching. Right. But then when it comes to actual management and leadership, there's definitely maybe a lack of awareness by no fault of their own. So let's take this a step back, maybe, because one thing I wanted to ask you, maybe to also help some people understand who might not be that familiar with this transition. When a faculty member moves up, let's just say from a research or teaching faculty to a chair position, there's a wide variety of reasons why that might happen. So what are some of those reasons? And what makes these transitions so complex? You've already addressed a few things. Some have to do with knowledge and everything, and then there's people. But let's see how we as coaches can assist and help with these complexities.
Sure. I mean, I think Tim, and you certainly know of all of the different circumstances in which one is given a leadership role or acquire some sort of leadership position at their institution. A lot of times folks are just voluntold. There just aren't enough bodies, or, the chair position does not seem attractive to anyone. Well, somebody's got to be chair. So we're going to volunteer you to do this. So in that instance, it's not that folks are reluctant to lead. It's just maybe not in their their sort of mental space to be leading others, but somebody has to do it. And so you've got those instances. You have other instances where people want to be in these roles and in these positions. And for a number of reasons, they feel like they can advocate for the department in a different way. And then you've got folks that are appointed to those roles by virtue of the fact that they were great researchers, they were great faculty members, they are known in their field, and therefore they must have the qualities to be a great leader in their department. They have so much knowledge, so much subject matter knowledge. Surely they will be great managers, great leaders. And so we've seen that go in a lot of different directions in the past. And so that's where things can get complex for a lot of folks. Because there has not been an intentionality behind the appointment. And when I say the appointment, I don't necessarily mean someone's appointment of someone in a role, but there's not been an intentionality behind this notion of leadership. And so it can get complex because new leaders can feel quite overwhelmed by the responsibility. Every time you wake up, there's a new problem hitting your email box, one that they didn't tell you about. And there are instances where you suddenly find out information about your colleagues that would only be available to you now that you're in a leadership role. And so now you have new knowledge about things that puts you in kind of a strange position. So there's just a lot of complexity around relationships, a lot of complexity around knowledge. And I just want to say there's a lot of complexity around this notion of middle management, leading up and down and all around. And that's sort of a coaching specialty that I like to say that I really dig into with my coaching clients. What does it mean to now lead, but what does it mean to now collaborate with your peers across the campus to get things done? And what does it mean to manage up?
Yeah, there's great systems awareness that is required for that, right?
An incredible amount of systems awareness. Yes.
So it's, again, what you addressed
earlier. It can be exhausting.
Yeah. And exactly what you said earlier, this idea of like there's knowledge, there's skills in there that you need, but then also how do you then translate that into actually bringing people on board? Yeah. You mentioned the reluctance to lead amongst, many faculty. I mean, I think some. For example, I've worked with an absolutely amazing department chair, and it was clear from the get-go when he was a baby assistant professor that he was going to be moving up, and he is now a dean. And I think there's even some higher things in store for him. And there are others, who are not so much. And you said some were voluntold. Yeah. But I think some of that also has to do with the whole promotion tenure process, because mostly those chairs come from tenure track and not from the non-tenure track people. And so what matters in order to be promoted, I think a lot of times there is the problem when people are brought in as chairs who are still associate professors, for example.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
That is problematic, isn't it?
I won't say it's problematic. I will say that if you don't maintain some awareness around your situation, it can be a trap. It can be a road that you're going down, and it's very hard to come back. I do have several clients, and they are not full professors holding chair positions. And we really talk about what's important. How do we keep the main thing, whatever they think that is? I have to admit a bias. If I am coaching, especially women of color or people who are traditionally marginalized, for me, the main thing is the main thing of making sure that they make full and not having all of these administrative responsibilities pull from their ability to get full professorship, is that if that is something that they want. And so I have a lot of clients where you're doing the work of the day and everything, and are you keeping up with your research and your writing so that you can get the full professorship that you always imagine yourself to be when you just first started this whole journey in academia.
And again, that requires somewhat of a systems approach, right? Because if the chairs are getting all this pressure from above, from their dean, their provost, from the associate dean, and they're not given the space to still pursue their research and pursue the activities that are required for them to actually make full professor. I mean, that's tricky, right? You can work with a client who's a chair. They could do everything right, but if they find it really difficult or it's impossible for them to really kind of balance this out. So how do you help faculty leaders balance this ongoing scholarly identity with the demands of administration and management?
Yeah, I wish there was a magic stick. I don't think I have one coaching client who has completely figured out the formula. And so it's a lot of give and take. Let's try this. Okay, that didn't work. A lot of it has to do with time management. Are you setting aside time for your research and writing? Are you in research and writing groups? Are you connected with those who are invested in your success as a professor? Are you working with and for a dean who recognizes that that's important? So for instance, in the past, I have worked with folks and their deans set aside 4 hours on a Friday morning and just encourage people not to have meetings during that time so that they could advance in their scholarship. But that's not always the case, right? And for the most part, most of us have to, I like to call it steal time. We've got to figure out how to find those hours in the day, in the week, through the month to make sure that we are doing what I like to call our heart work, which is the scholarship, the writing, remembering the reason we got into this whole deal anyway, and continuing along in a way that allows us to ensure that that is a part of our lifestyle. And that can be really tough, especially nowadays when everyone is probably doing the job of 2 or 3 people. Lots of universities are making cuts, cutting staff, cutting faculty. And so everyone's plate is just getting more and more full, meaning that the scholarship and the writing is occupying less and less space on that plate. And suddenly you're in a position where you actually have to fight for it, taking advantage of your sabbatical, taking advantage of those off days, finding time in the calendar to really block that time out for yourself, for your scholarship and writing. And it can be really hard because there's mission creep, there's calendar creep. If you don't have control over your calendar, people are populating it with meetings. And so you have to be really protective of your time and your energy.
But I think, that requires a lot of discipline. But I think if what research faculty have developed, at least most of them, I'd say is discipline. It's just directed in maybe a little.
It's different, right? It has to be directed in a different way. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Of course, setting aside time is one thing, but if you're not totally focused and present in that moment and you're dealing with a bunch of things, it's really, really difficult. But what I'm hearing you say is that the relational aspects gain exponentially in importance for yourself as a leader, but then also for your department and then also for your research, because you need to find a support system and accountability system with other people, I think a lot of times, to keep you going and also focus on the things that will ultimately help you with your career progression.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. One of the coaching questions I typically ask, and this is for a number of reasons, but I often ask people, who's on your bench? Who's helping you, essentially, is the question. And I coach a lot of folks who work with a therapist. So the therapist is on their bench. I coach with a lot of folks who have a writing group. So the members of their writing group are on their bench. I coach with a lot of folks who have peers that they talk about leadership issues and they get together regularly and just sort of talk through problems, right? Those folks are on their bench. And so when you ask a leader, who's helping you? I hear all of this stuff is going on. Who's on your bench? I think what worries me is when I work with folks and they can't name anyone. And so that becomes part of our coaching process, is to cultivate relationships so that they can develop a deep bench. I don't think any of us gets anywhere alone, but when we find ourselves alone, it's not because we've neglected the relationships, but we just felt like we didn't have the time to cultivate them in a way that could be not only useful, but rewarding. And so a lot of times early in my coaching relationships, that's a question I will ask. And it becomes a coaching goal when someone responds that there just aren't that many folks.
And I think, again, that's the big difference between the contributor and a leader. The contributor can be a one-person show, but a leader, it takes a village to be a leader.
It really does.
It does, doesn't it? So talking about relationships, I'm wondering, what is your approach to those coaching conversations when you're helping your client deal with some maybe complex interpersonal challenges? You talked about, you're a king among kings, right? You're a peer, and then no longer are you a real peer, but you're a little bit above that. And suddenly you have to hold former peers accountable, maybe people who are older than you, people who have maybe accomplished more as a scholar, who've been in the department longer, but you're now their chair. How do you help them through this? I mean, there's so many levels of complexity and I think of uncertainty and ambiguity too, and maybe some anxiety as well.
I think so. I think it can be particularly tough for newer or junior faculty when they are put in charge of very senior folks or people who've been around a while, and suddenly you have to tell people what to do or tell people kind of how to be, and hold folks accountable. So it can just be awkward. I think that this is where we as coaches really play a role in helping people understand their role and also helping people understand why their role is important. Really just giving them, I won't say giving them the confidence, but helping them to realize their strength and realize that they play a really important role for the university and making sure that they convey that to the folks that they are working with. A lot of times I have worked with folks where they are having difficulty in explaining to someone why a policy is important. We might role play. We may choose a particular person in the department and I'll say, okay, I'll be that person. What is the conversation you'd like to have? What's the outcome you seek in this conversation? Let's have a plan. And so it may be different for each person in the department. But one of the things I do as a coach is I like to say, let's script this out. So what will you say? What will that email say? Run that back by me. How does that sound? Does that feel like it's in alignment with your leadership values? And so do a lot of practicing. Role play, I think, is really effective. And I think it's probably, I won't say it's underutilized. I don't know how many coaches use role play. I know that I probably don't use role play enough and that it can be incredibly helpful.
What other tools, so you talk about role playing, what other tools are you using to help your clients, or maybe some models or frameworks that you found really impactful and useful in your work?
I think that some of the typical tools that most coaches lean on, right? Making sure that clients do some values work, understanding what's important to them, reminding themselves of why they do this in the first place, reminding themselves of why it's important to work in a space that is civil, that is kind, that is, right, that might be a client's value, but it may not be showing up in their workspace. So how do we get you closer to that if that is so important to you? So a lot of values identification work. I do a lot of work around leadership vision and leadership philosophy. And so this is back to the earlier point in our conversation, right? What kind of leader do you want to be? When you walk into a room or walk out of the room, what would you like people to say about your leadership? I remember working with a person where we got to the point where they knew that whatever they did would not make a lot of people happy. Can't make 100% of the people happy all of the time. But you can share with folks that you have a process for decision making. And the best that this person could do is explain the process. You may not agree with the outcome, but you can't disagree with my decision-making process. I'm very transparent about that, right? And so I work with a lot of folks to really articulate that because I think sometimes it's in their heads and it's all jumbled around. So there's a lot of work around just articulating the values, articulating the leadership philosophy, even writing that down, being very clear about that. And then I do just a lot of visioning work with folks. The chair position, the assistant dean position, the associate dean position may not be their final goal in leadership. They may want to move on. They may want to do some more awesome things at their university or at another university. So we talk a lot about visioning. We talk a lot about goal setting. We talk a lot about gaps. What do these roles that you aspire to, what do they call for? What can you already bring to that role? And now let's identify the gaps. What do we need more of so that we can position you to be a stronger candidate for whatever that next position is for you? So we do a lot of technical work too. I like to call it the being and the doing of leadership. So the doing is the kind of the skills and the capacities and those kinds of things. The being of leadership is identifying the leadership philosophy, your vision, your goals, your values. And so I tend to separate those two and do a lot of work around those two areas.
Well, I can imagine with visioning, once in a while it happens that you're working with a designated leader and they might discover that maybe leadership really isn't their thing.
Not so much, right?
They'd rather be faculty, and that's okay as well.
And it's fine. Yes.
It's not that.
So it's not fun anymore.
What's that? No.
It's not fun anymore.
A lot of that. I mean, once I started working so closely with my chair and then later, with deans, associate deans, I heard and I found out the kind of stuff they're dealing with day in, day out. It's a lot. And some of them are just, I don't know if I would want to do that, but Some are made for it and they enjoy it. During to kind of come full circle to wrap this up, I'm wondering, you said that during the early career of a faculty member, when it's about, their research and their degree and then the publications and being a faculty member, there's really not a whole lot of preparation, a whole lot of development to prepare people for managerial and then especially leadership positions. So if you could design, let's say, the ideal coaching ecosystem for developing new faculty leaders in higher ed, what would that look like?
Yeah, I love this collective visioning that we can do together, Tim. I think when you gave this question to me earlier, I really thought about it. And I think a successful ecosystem of coaching and leadership development happens in three ways. It happens, first of all, with kind of that typical professional development where you as a group are collectively sort of learning processes, systems, things like that, what works, what doesn't work in terms of university leadership, college leadership. I like this idea of also one-on-one coaching, maybe making sure that everyone has someone to speak with confidentially, to really be open with and to share challenges, to share goals and dreams about leadership. I don't know that necessarily new faculty completely know the landscape out there for leadership. Some do, and some are very hyper specific about how they want to move up. Others just don't know. Others don't know the possibilities, and having someone to talk to and not be ashamed that they're ambitious about that and not be embarrassed about that, I think is key. So a coach can really help out with that. But I'm a really big believer in peer coaching and peer support. And so my ecosystem would also include maybe some group coaching, maybe some peer support. And so making sure that folks had access to a small group of others to talk about leadership challenges, even talk about leadership wins, and creating a coaching arc. It could be over the course of a year or a course of 6 months, but making sure it's not one of those, as you mentioned earlier, a one and done workshop where you walk out and you're not quite sure how it's resonating. You're not quite sure how to apply it. And so a sustainable experience that helps a person learn on 3 different levels: the group level, the small group level, like the peer group level, and then the one-to-one level with the coach, is a very useful ecosystem of learning and professional development for anyone interested in leadership, faculty or not.
I love that description. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, this certainly applies to staff. And I think it's important to bake that into the institution and bake that into the career pipeline. I think that's one of the things that a lot of times is missing. It really is a whole package. Talking about the village, right? There's mentorship, there's peer support, group coaching, individual coaching, all these different angles of getting the individual positioned to be I think a more adept and conscious contributor to the greater good. And of course, another thing that we're sometimes running up against is the image of coaching, especially at the mid and lower level. Well, a lot of times people thinking, oh my God, I'm getting a coach, I must be in trouble.
Yes, it's punitive. Yes.
So to get through that, so I guess
typical.
What we need to do, that's why I said it's an ecosystem, right? We have to also work with other leaders. Dorine, thank you so very much for this amazing and really insightful conversation. I really couldn't think of a better way to wrap up the season.
Well, Tim, thank you for letting me be your season finale guest. I was really excited when you asked me to do this, and I do agree with you. This is an incredibly important topic, and I hope that folks know that there are a lot of us out there who are rooting for them and only wish them much success in a very complicated and complex time of leadership.
Amen. Or as I like to say, words to live, lead, and coach by. Dorine, thank you so very much. Well, it's hard to believe, but today's conversation, as Dorine just said, wraps season 1 of the Coaching in Higher Education podcast after 16 episodes. What began as a really small side project to record great conversations with collaborators and coaching colleagues has certainly taken on a life of its own. And I have you, our audience, to thank for that. Your feedback, your input, and your encouragement. As a result, I'm happy to say that work on season 2 has already begun, and I'll be sharing some more information with you very soon. For now, though, thanks for listening and spending a little time with us, not only today, but over the past several months. All my guests and I truly appreciate you and trust you were able to gain some valuable insights from these conversations. As always, if you're interested in some more information on this episode, our guest, and today's topic, please visit our companion website, higheredcoaching.us or leadershipimagined.com/podcast. See you soon for season 2, And until then, keep making a difference, one client and one conversation at a time. Take care.